Hello, bookworms. How is it going? So, today we'll be reading the book Galleleo Gallelei. It's a very thin book, it'll be a short chapter. So, let's start and see and dwell into the life of Galleleo Gallelei. Let's begin. Little Galileo. In the ancient town of Pisa in Italy was born a little boy whose achievements were to become an important milestone in the progress of science. This was little Galileo Galilei, who used to spend his time in constructing little instruments and pieces of machinery to amuse himself and his friends. His father, a philosopher of some repute, saw little in Galileo the signs of a future genius. In the early 1570, Galileo's family moved to Florence. Here, he began his normal formal education. His father was determined to give his son the best education possible. He was not a rich man, and in spite of the heavy expense, he sent Galileo to a medical school. One day, while listening to the sermon in church, his mind wandered and his eyes straight to the ceiling of the cathedral. He noticed a huge lamp swaying gently with the breeze. Galileo's quick mind made him clutch the pulse at his wrist. He wanted to measure the time taken by the lamp between any two swings. There were no watches or clocks in those days. Time could be measured only with the help of an hourglass. It was quick thinking on Galileo's part to time the swing of the lamp with his pulse. He found out that the time taken by the lamp between any two swings was the same, no matter how hard the swing was. Even you can do this. All you have to do is to hold your left wrist with your right hand. Your middle finger will feel a beat, a heartbeat. At that time, Galileo had no idea of the importance of his discovery. He was entirely ignorant about mathematics. It was only years later that he applied his discovery of the swing of the pendulum to the making of a clock. Galileo's father wanted him to become a great man of medicine, especially since he was paying through his nose for it. He had great hopes for his son and expected him to excel. Young Galileo was sent to study medicine and the philosophy of Aristotle at the University of Pisa. He studied there for 4 years. During the course of his study, he happened to hear a lecture on mathematics at his college. This got him interested in the subject. He decided to take it up seriously. The swing in the pendulum. Galileo never finished his studies as his father could not afford the expenses. They had to leave Pisa and return to Florence. On returning to Florence, Galileo began to teach mathematics at the Florence Academy. In 1586, he published a paper describing the hydrostatic balance. This invention made him known throughout Italy. During this time, he had begun questioning what he had studied in Pisa, namely the philosophy of Aristotle. Aristotle was a great philosopher of great genius in ancient Greece. He criticized many of the beliefs held sacred by the Catholic Church. The Church at that time did not leave any room for changes in attitudes. So, every great scientist or a mathematician had to wage a pitched battle against the Church. Thus, a new discovery was not just a development in technology, but also a question of one's morality. Galileo took off from his teaching to make the model of a clock, a grandfather clock, which measures time by swinging of the pendulum. Today, we realize the importance of the clock and how the world cannot function without it. So, schools would not know when to begin. Trains and aircraft would not know when to leave. Television people would not know when to put up a program. So much depends on the careful measurement of time. Professor of Mathematics. Had Galileo made no further contribution to science apart from deciphering the secret of a swinging pendulum, his name would have still been remembered, and he would still have been a remarkable personality. But his love for experiments was so great that it did not allow him to sit idle. In 1586, he was appointed professor of mathematics at Pisa. His fame grew quickly. 2000 years earlier, Aristotle has said that a heavy body will fall to the ground more rapidly than a lighter one. If you think about it, the observation seems correct. If you take a feather and a stone and drop it from a height, the stone will definitely fall down first, while the feather will just fly away. But notice that the feather flies away and does not drop instantly. At the same time, two objects of different weights will fall down together. You can test this with a piece of wood and a piece of iron. Meanwhile, 1592 saw Galileo as professor of mathematics at Padua. By this time, he had become very sure that the theory propounded by Copernicus was correct and that the earth did really move around the sun. This was contrary to what people believed in those days and what he had studied as a part of Aristotle's theories. Copernicus was born in 1473, a good 100 years before Galileo. He was a priest and used to practice medicine for the church. His main interest was astronomy. At that time, people believed that sun moved around the earth. Today, we take it for granted that it is not so. Many things that we hold true today can be proved wrong tomorrow. Similarly, Copernicus proved that it is the earth that goes around the sun and not vice versa. A look at the stars. Until now, Galileo had not made any astronomical observations himself. The appearance of a brilliant new star in 1604 awakened his interest in the sky. We feel that the sky is the same every day, but if we observe it closely through a telescope, we can see the movement of stars and planets. Galileo had no telescope to look through. Even the idea was not born at that time. One day, he heard that a man called Lipschi has discovered something by which far objects could be easily seen. Galileo wrote in his book, "About 10 months ago, a report reached my ears that a Dutchman has constructed a telescope, by the aid of which visible objects, although at great distance from the eye of the observer, were seen distinctly as if near. At length, by sparing neither labor nor expense, I succeeded in constructing myself an instrument so superior that objects seen through it appeared magnified nearly 1,000 times, and more than 30 times nearer than if viewed by natural powers of sight alone." The brilliant star that appeared in 1604 had excited the attention of many astronomers. Some said it was a meteor, while others were simply puzzled. Galileo turned his newly made telescope towards the star. At that time, it was the most powerful telescope in the world, and Galileo had already become famous throughout Europe for it. Through it, he made many observations of the new star and many notes and drawings. Then one day in 1605, he decided to tell the world about his discovery. The subject attracted thousands of people. They were, along with the general public, astronomers, scientists, philosophers, friends and enemies. The room was packed with people, listening with bated breath. The people never stopped coming. The situation got out of control and Galileo had to shift the venue to some open space nearby. It was an unusual sight. The sun beat down on the great crowd of people. Galileo stood on a little mount. He was burly and not very tall. His hair was almost red and his eyes had a deadly penetration. He was definitely not handsome. especially because of his huge, flat nose. But he was certainly interesting to look because while he talked, his face continuously changed expressions. His audience listened to each and every word very attentively. And after his long lecture, Galileo was bold enough to tease his audience by telling them that they were being enthusiastic about a trifle happening while failing to see the wonders of the world. In outer space, Galileo was very excited about his invention of the telescope. He rapidly improved on the instrument until the object viewed through the telescope would be thrice magnified. He manufactured the instruments with his own hands, and they were in heavy demand all over the Europe. These telescopes, known by his name, are now used as opera glasses. Galileo began to make observations through his telescope and published a book about his findings. He saw the surface of the moon and its mountains and the landscape that was there on the moon. He observed that Milky Way was actually a collection of small stars. An important discovery was that of Jupiter. A year later, Galileo found that Jupiter was not alone, but was attended by 3 little stars. Within a week, he had established that there were 4 such objects, and that they were not stars at all. They were moons or satellites revolving around Jupiter, just like our moon revolves around the sun. This discovery seemed to have excited Galileo more than any other. Jupiter seemed to be a miniature solar system. He became even more convinced that Copernicus was right. He found more proof when he discovered that planet Venus had phases similar to that of moon. Sometimes Venus was a crescent, and sometimes a semicircle, and sometimes almost a full disk. According to the Greek theory of another ancient Greek astronomer and mathematician, the Earth was the center of the universe. But such a theory could not explain the reasons for various shapes of Venus. Ptolemy's system could only account for the crescent shape and not the other two. Perhaps it was because Ptolemy did not have a telescope to look through. Galileo was never inclined to keep his findings to himself. Therefore, he used to openly teach the doctrine about the truth of the Copernican system. The publication of Sidrus Nuncius made him world famous. It also led to his first troubles with the Roman Catholic Church. A telescopic view. Galileo carried his new instrument, the telescope, to Venice and presented it to the Senate. They rewarded him by conferring upon him for life the professorship of Padua and raising his salary from 520 to 1,000 florins. 4 months, the telescope was a tremendous success. The excitement of the people mounted to a frenzy. Hundreds of people flocked to his house to see the magical instrument. One day, a friend of his ascended the tower of St. Mark's, where he could use his new device without any interference. But unfortunately for him, he was recognized by the crowd in the street. Such was the excitement that they took possession of the wonder instrument and detained the impatient experimenter for more than 6 hours until all had seen his effect. With his improved telescope, Galileo began to make discoveries that were to astonish the world, change the science of astronomy, and bring all the trouble of his life in their wake. In the dark silence at the top of his house, under the vast heavens, he discovered the number of stars in the Pleiades, picked out the 4 secondary planets revolving around Jupiter, and saw the first glimmering of the possession of Saturn and its rings. It was the first time in the history of any civilization that the man was actually looking at the planet and their characteristic so closely. He published his discoveries immediately, and that raised a storm. Galileo found himself surrounded by enemies. Some struck at him, saying that they had been the first to discover the planets, while others hastened to see that Galileo was wrong in his observations. He was even accused of putting magic in his telescope. Galileo did not pay any attention. In 1611, he went to Rome, and there he received the honor. Princes, cardinals, and prelates all hastened to meet this intellectual giant. He had with him the best telescope, and he showed his distinguished host his latest discovery, namely the black spots on the sun's surface. Galileo's clear thinking and almost maddening love for the truth earned him many enemies. But he did nothing to soften his stand. On the contrary, his character was such that he instigated his enemies even more and ridiculed their reasons. Meanwhile, he had resigned his post at Padua and had settled in Florence as a mathematician to the Grand Duke of Tuscany. For a while, he was left in peace. Conflicts with the Church. Galileo's thought gained popularity even outside the confines of the universities. To add to this, he had a flair for Italian, which helped him putting across his thoughts in a creative manner. But all this and his quick wit only increased the number of his enemies. He was an extremely frank person. Often, he ridiculed his opponents if he disagreed with them. He was a common man, and it was a common sight to see him arguing and contesting with a dozen of people who secretly hated him. Most often, he would let his opponents talk, pour out their minds one by one, and then, in a few simple words, he would strike back. His enemies could do nothing but bite their lips and look at each other in confusion. Galileo had the knack of making such people look rather foolish. The conflict between Galileo and the followers of Aristotle and Ptolemy, and later the Church, rose out of his astronomical theory. The accepted theory in those days was that the earth was fixed, with everything revolving around it. But Galileo's theory, called the heliocentric theory, which was earlier proposed by Copernicus, was that the sun is fixed and the other celestial bodies, including the earth, revolve around it. Copernicus did not have enough evidence to prove his theory, but Galileo made several studies, conducted various experiments using his telescope, and was convinced about his theory. He had seen the satellites of Jupiter and the movement of the sunspots across the face of the sun, which left no doubt in his mind about his belief. Galileo then wrote a letter in which he tried to show that the Copernican theory was not consistent with the biblical interpretations. Some of his enemies sent a copy of this letter to those in Rome who punished the people opposed to the teachings of the church. He went to Rome to beg the authorities to leave the way open for the change, but they did not appreciate his efforts and instead clung on to the time-honored belief that mathematical and scientific theories have nothing to do with the physical reality. All they could see was that the sun rises from the east and sets in the west, and that the earth is static. The discussion soon turned into arguments and began more and more acute, until in 1616, Pope Paul V conveyed a semi-official warning to Galileo. He was warned that he must not hold, teach, or defend the forbidden theory. Galileo had no choice but to abide by the warning. He was told that he could discuss it as a hypothesis, but definitely not as a theory or as a fact. Galileo's masterpiece. There was a period of temporary peace while Galileo worked in silence. But it lasted only till he wrote his great masterpiece, the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. This was in 1632 when Galileo was 70. In this book, he compared the Ptolemaic Aristotelian theory to the Copernican theory to show that the latter was logically more superior. It created a tremendous stir, for it combined the strong scientific theory with an elegant style of writing. It was greeted with applause and cries of praise from every part of the European continent as a masterpiece of all times. However, the impact of the book on the religious and political circle in Rome was disastrous. As the news reached there, Galileo was summoned to appear before the authorities. He was to answer to the charge of willfully disobeying the order not to hold or defend the Copernican theory. He did not have much choice but to flatly deny that he had never tried to teach or defend such a theory. It is said that he was made to kneel and that he was compelled to say that earth does not move and it was the center of the universe. He also had to say that arguments of Copernicus were weak and inconclusive, but under his breath he quickly and quietly added, "Nevertheless, it does move." His acts of repentance did not save him from punishment, as the books were clearly written in defiance of the earlier ban. Moreover, it was believed to contain a caricature of one of the popes. He was found guilty and finally he had to admit that he had disobeyed the church's order. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. But seeing his poor health and old age, he was allowed to house arrest instead of being sent to jail. He was sent to his little estate near Florence for the rest of his life and was to be there in total seclusion. Troubled times. From the end of the trial and the beginning of the house arrest, Galileo's life was a tragedy. Though he was free to continue his work and be with his family in his own house, life was not easy for him. His favorite daughter was seized with a sudden illness and she died soon after. This incident was a big blow to the Galileo's miserable life. Yet he went on working. He wrote his dialogue on the new science, which contained accounts of his early experiments and studies in mechanics. After this, he made his last astronomical discovery about the curious appearances in the lunar circle known as the moon's librations. All these experiments and writings were done in total seclusion. The worst of the tragedies was yet to come. Just a few months later, Galileo became blind. Some say he also became deaf. At the age of 73, he had entered a world darker than any dungeon and was much lonelier than he would have been in a prison cell. Although it seemed the end of the world to him, Galileo does not allow himself to be defeated. He was a courageous man and never gave up in life. He once laboriously wrote a letter to his friend. "I am totally and irreparably blind. These heavens, this earth, this universe, which by wonderful observations I had enlarged 1,000 times, are now dwindled into the narrow space which I found myself occupying. So it pleases God, it shall therefore please me also." Can you believe anybody having such faith and courage after a series of such tragedies? After reading this beautiful letter, Galileo's friend, Father Castelli, was truly touched by the humility of this great man, and so he wrote, "The noblest eye which nature had ever made is darkened. But the light he showed to mankind still shines brightly. Even though he could see no more, and old age has crept in, Galileo continued his research with all his strength and spirit. He thought of various means to use the pendulum to regulate the clockwork. Galileo was still grappling with the mysteries of the universe even when he fell victim to a slow fever. He always kept himself busy. On such day, he was dictating his latest theories on the impact of matter to his pupils when the end came. Galileo was in his 78th year when he died. A great scientist, Galileo Galilei can easily be called the founder of modern experimental science. Some historians disagree about giving him this title. These historians maintain that Galileo's real originality lays in the way he approached scientific problems. What it is was really interesting and simple. He reduced those problems to very simple terms on the basis of everyday experience and common sense logic. Then he analyzed and resolved them according to simple mathematical descriptions. Probably, the most fascinating thing about him was that he would always refuse to accept the statement on the authority of others. He insisted upon the need to look, see, experiment, and then confirm his views. He laid a pattern for the scientists who were to come after him and explore various aspects of science like the human body, nature of atoms, the stars, and anything under the sun. In any case, is there any point in limiting his contribution to just words like founder, discoverer, or inventor? To begin with, they give an untrue picture of the development of science. Surely you would agree that no man can discover or invent anything at all by himself. All scientists are dependent on one another and on those who have worked in the same field before them. Science only flourishes when there is a free worldwide exchange of knowledge. One scientist advances from where others have left off, rarely from the very beginning. Are they not like boys climbing on top of one another? Till the boy on the top can see something over the wall. But this is not to undermine Galileo's contribution to science and to humans' development in general. For his love of knowledge, he had to suffer almost throughout his life. The political and religious authorities at that time were so close-minded that they refused to see any sense in what Galileo said. In 1979, more than 350 years after Galileo's trial, Pope John Paul II declared that Roman Catholic Church may have been mistaken in condemning Galileo. So that was a short description of the great scientist, the experimenter, the visionary, one who made us see beyond stars, one who made us see into the heavens directly in the night sky, Galileo Galilei. By narrating this small biography, if I had committed any spelling mistakes, any pronunciation mistake, or if I have misspelled any word, I apologize for that. And I promise I'll come back with more interesting book in the coming future. Till then, please do subscribe to the channel if you like the narration. And if you end up liking this video, I would request you, ladies and gentlemen, to please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And also share it with your bibliophile friends. Then I'll see you next time and keep those pages turning. Thank you so much and I love you all.